Scotland. Caledonia, the place I call home. This is the Scotland the world knows and loves. Our history dense with passion and struggle. They say our national pride flows like Scotch whisky in our veins. Scots are deeply patriotic, although millions of us live in other parts of the world. Now we're faced with a dilemma. We like life the way it is, but the Scottish nationalists want change, an end to our 300-year-long union with England, the end to the United Kingdom as we know it. Taking a trip across my homeland, I'll explore the vision of an independent Scotland. My big question is, are Scottish people, people like me, ready for independence? Do we really want to go it alone in 2014?
In my heart of hearts, nobody else will make better decisions than the people who live and work in this country, and that is the heart of the democratic case for Scottish independence.
Welcome to Ballater. Some historians say the Highland Games began in the 12th century and were King Malcolm III of Scotland's way of finding the fastest runner to be his royal messenger. Games like this happen all over Scotland, a celebration of our culture. Scots are a passionate, emotional bunch. I should know I'm one of them, even though I now live in the south of England.
Oh yeah, well maybe starting up with the lot of gathering food, no?
But I'm proud to call myself a Scot. Excited by our national qualities of courage, warmth, ingenuity, and our warrior spirits. That's not to say that I'm not proud of being British too. It's just that the Scottish strands of my DNA shout loudest.
Welcome in the fight band of the Royal Regiment of Scotland and Her Majesty the Queen's Royal Guard. First Scots, the Royal Scots Borderers.
Being here at the Games, I feel so nostalgic and conflicted. Amongst the pipes and the drums, going it alone feels right, but I still need some convincing.
People can be Scottish, as I am, and British, as I am, and proud of being both, and we don't see why we should have to choose between the two.
But I'm worried our tartan hearts will overrule our heads. In September 2014, my Scotland could be changed forever.
Nationalism is irrationality. You and I, why are we different? I mean, because you were born across an artificially drawn line on the map. You cannot look at this as just sort of a small political issue. This is a once-in-a-lifetime issue. I mean, this doesn't come across, this is not an election. This is breaking up the United Kingdom, which is a G7, UN Security Council, NATO nuclear-armed power. That you're one of the most important countries in the world, and you're actually talking about breaking it up, which would have dramatic repercussions.
There are two big things that you learn when you're born and brought up in Scotland. The first is how to master the art of being the underdog, and the second is how to cultivate the dislike of the English. Now, in my household, when I was raised, we were told that this was just silly, petty rivalry and that there was no place for it in reality. But I have been fascinated since I was a wee nipper about our identity and why feeling Scottish feels like belonging to a different tribe altogether.
In the 1980s, Scotland went through a very difficult question about identity. Who are we? What's our thing? What do we like? How do we behave? And it was difficult. It took time for people to understand it, but we resolved it. So at the start of the 80s, if you saw somebody wearing a kilt to a wedding in Scotland, at that time, you would look at them and you would say, are you making a point? And now, relaxedly, as if it's no issue, if you go to a Scottish wedding, everyone's in kilts.
I've just come down from the Isle of Skye. I'm no very big and I'm awful shy, and the lassies shout when I go by, Donald, where's your trousers? Let the wind blow high, let the wind blow low, through the streets in my kit I'll go. All the lassies say hello, Donald, where's your trousers?
Scotland does feel much more sure of itself to me. But in 2014, how much will they consider the boring bits? Tough questions about business, employment, the economic pros and cons of an independent Scotland. I think Scots are more likely to vote on the basis that they're fed up being the poorest oil-bearing country in the world, and that the English, frankly, are a miserable, snotty band of southerners. It seems natural to go back to my roots, and there's my old friend Jill, who's a wee bit camera shy, to remind me why it is I feel such love for Scotland.
This is Kilmacombe, a little village just outside Glasgow near the west coast of Scotland, and it's where I grew up, and I guess it's really where I learned to be a Scottish person. I learned a work ethic just across the road there at Pierre's Cafe and Deli. I spent years there serving ice cream and being told to have superhuman levels of friendliness, which is what Scottishness is all about, really. Just down here at that newsagent is where I had my first ever job. I picked up papers there when I was 11 years old to go and deliver them to people. This hall here is where I learned to Scottish country dance. I've spent many an evening at a wedding dancing with my Scottish friends and revelling in the feeling that we're different. Across here, I used to go there and buy Scotch meat pies with my mum on a Saturday. Now, all of these little cultural things have given me this very definite identity that I feel like a Scottish person. But does that mean that I now want to separate from the rest of the Union and from my friends and family who now live in the south?
Let me tell you that I love you, that I think about you all the time. Caledonia, and if I should become a stranger, you know that it would make me more than sad. Caledonia's been everything I've ever had.
For thousands of years, kings and queens of Scotland sat on the throne, sending their people to fight in the name of a free Scotland. There's no shortage of history here. It's everywhere. 43 kilometres northwest of Glasgow is Stirling. The Scottish Wars of Independence began here in 1296, when King Edward of England led an invasion party and took occupancy in the then abandoned Stirling Castle, one of Scotland's key strongholds.
The trouble with Scotland is that it's full of Scots.
Well, what news? We're outnumbered. At least 3-1.
Braveheart, the movie, brought Scotland's hero William Wallace to life and made the Scottish story a bestseller all over the world. It may just be Hollywood, but I can't help it tugging at my heartstrings.
Sons of Scotland, I am William Wallace, and I see a whole army of my countrymen here in defiance of tyranny. Would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
This is Loudon Hill, the site of not one, but two decisive victories for the Scots against the English. The first came in 1297, when William Wallace and his forces sabotaged the English king's baggage train, leading to victory. Just 10 years later, in 1307, Robert the Bruce led his troops to victory, even though he only had 500 Scotsmen on his side. By digging tactical ditches, they repelled an English force numbering up to 6,000 men.
But it was Wallace who became Scotland's real hero, and a monument was built near Stirling Bridge to commemorate his honour. It's a permanent reminder that 300 years ago, England underestimated the Scots' determination for sovereignty. Historian Tom Devine is the man to talk to about Braveheart.
Tom, in terms of the Braveheart effect that was particularly palpable after that movie came out, I know it's a while ago now, does that have any place in this debate? Are there people who still feel like when they watch that movie that they want to go out and beat their chests and vote yes?
Well, it certainly did have an extraordinary effect at the time. I think the effect has dwindled. The Wallace thing, however, is very interesting because in the mid-19th century, the Wallace Monument was raised beside Stirling, where his great battles were fought. The reason was that the Unionists of the time who subscribed to the monument regarded Wallace as a Unionist hero because the argument was he and Robert the Bruce had delivered the Scots from English conquest, allowed Scotland to enter a partnership union in 1707, aka William Wallace as a Unionist.
Do you think that the people of Scotland who are eligible to vote, are they brave enough to go on this adventure? Because it's a radical idea, isn't it?
You've got to watch the term brave. This is going to be about the future of them and their families. They've got to consider things prudently. This is not a melodrama, it's a political exercise.
Imagine the most iconic image of the United Kingdom. It's Union Jack. It's made up of the flags of St George of England, St Patrick of Ireland, and St Andrew of Scotland. But take out the Scottish flag, and the Union Jack is no more. Rule Britannia bites the dust.
When I first came home to Scotland, I expected to find a country that was asking itself this massive question about severing ties with the UK, and everybody would be focusing on myths and history and this idea of Braveheart and Mel Gibson. And I even imagined that if they were able to vote for Mel Gibson and put him in Edinburgh making decisions for the Scottish people, that there would be plenty of people who wanted to vote yes to that. But actually, what I've discovered since being home is that there really isn't this level of anti-English feeling that I suspected there would be. In fact, I think this debate is about Scotland feeling a new political identity and feeling desperate to want to assert that.
But still, it's going to be a struggle for the nationalists. Most people aren't ready to even consider change. Their Yes campaign's headquarters are prominently based in Glasgow, Scotland's largest city, and it's no coincidence which street they chose.
We like to think that we're a campaign based very much on hope and aspiration and ambition, so it's an ideal address.
Talk to me about this declaration that's on the wall over here. I'd never seen it until I came in here today. When I read it, I think to myself, who wouldn't vote for that?
Yep.
You know, I mean, you read it and you think Scotland's future in Scotland's hand. It makes a great soundbite. But still at the back of my mind, I think it's such a mess of practicalities. There's that little part of my head that says, I'm just not sure we could do it.
The logistical challenge is, as you say, is a considerable one because there is an appetite right around the country. A lot of them are people who, like me, have no previous connection with any political campaign or any political party, but who do just feel that this is a once-in-a-lifetime historic opportunity to put Scotland on a different course, to pick a different direction from the direction of travel of the UK.
Rule Britannia, Britannia rules away.
By contrast, the No campaign's headquarters are hidden away in an office block. Even at this demonstration outside the Scottish Parliament for the Union, they were nowhere to be seen. Some of their supporters, however, are trying to be more visible, even if they're not exactly in tune.
Complacency is the Unionist disease. We have seen this throughout history in all regions of the UK. The Unionists are very slow to rouse. It's like the old British bulldog thing, you know, it lies there sleeping forever until it's finally roused from its slumber. And we feel in UKIP that the current Better Together campaign, which is the main No campaign, exactly as you say. One, where are they? Because I don't see them. I haven't seen them in my city of Glasgow. They haven't come to my door. The Yes campaign haven't seen Better Together.
Rule Britannia, Britannia rules away. Britain never shall be slain.
And when the No campaign is getting its message through, it isn't always being well received.
I like the positive visions of the independent Scotland, and I don't see any positive visions of like the Union at the moment.
I'm still pretty much on the fence of it. I've yet to find any concrete information that sort of says one way or the other, really.
They're interested or involved in, and we explore it.
Well, the polls say Scotland doesn't want independence.
Would you be willing to share it with me? Just take a couple of minutes.
And when I ask people's opinion, they treat me like an annoying midgie they want to swat.
How far do you think people are willing to go, Paul, to make this happen?
Yeah, well, the fact that quite a lot of people appear to be not willing to go as far as ballot box would suggest not very far. No, because you look at history, I mean, other countries have gone to extreme lengths to gain independence. And America had to fight a war, Ireland had to fight a war. I mean, one of the major things that brought about Indian independence was Gandhi going on hunger strike to bring down the British Raj. I mean, you can hardly see Alex Salmond going on a hunger strike, can you?
That's just it. Strife and struggle are not behind this vote. Maybe that's why I get the feeling everyone wants it to just go away. But if Scots turn their back on the vote, the nationalists might win by default. Right now, Scots are doing what they do best, and that's sending the whole thing up. And there's no better place to do that than at Scotland's largest comedy festival, the Edinburgh Fringe.
Hello, and welcome to an improvised improv show. The theme of today's show is Scottish independence.
All right, so I've just put up a lot of dynamite along the River Tweed, and if we set that off, we should literally separate Scotland and England.
Roger, you'll need an English match to like that.
Of course, Scottish matches are crap.
I'm Vladimir McTavish. I'm Keith McAllister. Join us for the next hour as we look at the state of Britain.
How many Scottish people regard themselves as British? 3. Good.
When he's not Vladimir McTavish,
absolutely.
he's Paul Snedden, but he's still Scottish.
So let's talk about this whole idea of Scottish identity, because it's making up a great part of the debate, isn't it? And obviously, I live in England now, so I feel possibly even more Scottish than I did before. How do you describe a Scottish person? What is it that makes us different as a tribe?
There's this strand in Scottish culture that people just don't take, 1, themselves seriously, and 2, they don't take the country seriously. I mean, no matter how patriotic Scottish people are, they really have a huge sense of, sending up their own culture.
I'm a carrot.
You're a carrot.
I agree with Paul. A healthy sense of the ridiculous is always good. But even if Scots aren't engaged, the rest of the world is. I hope people realise that this vote is not just about Scotland. It will have ramifications far beyond this land of 5 million people. The Catalans, who want independence from Spain, look to Scotland as a vision of what could be. Other countries in the same boat watch and worry, and so do I. But there are some who believe independence is inevitable. Socialist Rob McAlpin built his eco-house outside Scotland's political capital. His views, like his home, might be considered utopian.
What about divisiveness? I mean, we've seen it happen in places like Quebec, where when asked, do you want to stay with the rest of the country or do you want to sever those ties? It ended up being quite divisive for lots of communities. I mean, do you worry about that? Because I notice that when I ask people, they kind of want to hide their light under a bushel. They're not quite ready to say that they're with one side or the other.
No, I'm not so worried about that. And the reason I'm not worried about it in the Scottish context is there is very, very little element of ethnic nationalism. It really is genuinely a beacon for others who are then able to say, if Scotland can do it, why can't we do it? So I think there's an awful lot of people looking on and saying, you know something, I want change. And I'm looking to see where change is happening, to see what it can bring, what it can tell us. And certainly, the degree of interest I've had internationally is enormous.
Nationalism is a poor man's nationalism.
I'm a poor man.
You must be a nationalist.
I'm beginning to see the advantages of independence, but am I just being optimistic? If our own history tells me anything, it's beware, and there is good reason for us to be cautious. In 1698, Scotland took a massive gamble, trying to create new trade routes with South America by colonising the Isthmus of Panama. It was called the Darien Scheme.
It was badly planned and managed, but to me as an historian, Darien represents something symbolic. It represents the new aspiration of the Scots to move from the old European connection to seeking their future in the Atlantic world. Darien is a presage, it's, if you like, a predictor of what is to come, even though it was a failure in its own right. As some scholars argue, that was one of the basic triggers for the Union of 1707. So it's possible, it's happened in the past, that they might be prepared to take the gamble in 2014.
So is this whole debate just another gamble? There's no doubt that history will rub off on many a Scot when it comes to the vote. But for me personally, I've always been head over heart when it comes to decisions like this. Back in 1997, I had the opportunity to vote for a Scottish Parliament and I voted against. I was working as a trainee journalist and I kept meeting these politicians who all seemed like a boorish and backward lot to me. Fortunately for them, the outcome wasn't affected by my vote. And on the 12th of May 1999, the Scottish Parliament was reconvened.
And I want to start with words I've always wanted either to say or hear someone say. The Scottish Parliament adjourned on the 25th day of March in the year 1707 is hereby reconvened.
Despite my reservations, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in my country.
I, Donald Campbell Dewar.
Swear that I will be faithful and bear
Donald
true
Dewar became Scotland's first minister.
To Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth.
To Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth.
The Scottish Parliament now had power over education, healthcare and economic development. And there was more. Guaranteed funding from Westminster, based on the formula devised by their top financial advisor, Lord Barnett. Last year, Scotland's share was a massive $54 billion.
Scotland benefits from the Barnett formula to the tune that everybody in Scotland, including myself, gets £1,800 a year more from the British, essentially the British government, in terms of public services. So why would you give that up?
Like the Loch Ness Monster, that's a myth. Scotland, in fact, does not receive a net subsidy. But this one misleading belief is often the most common reason for wanting to stay in the Union. Scots are scared we won't be able to stay in the black without the United Kingdom. And what's really frustrating is that none of the millions of Scots living around the world who want a say in this debate will get a vote, and that includes me. Even closer to home, it seems unfair that no one else in the Union, Northern Ireland, Wales and England, get a vote too. After all, it affects their future just as much. If history could speak, Dunnottar Castle on the east coast could tell of 305 years of disagreements, bloody squabbles and cross-border contempt. But breaking up the Union would spell the end of a stormy marriage. If Scots vote yes, there's the small matter of arming the nation, organising the national debt, figuring out which currency to have, and a myriad of other head-exploding challenges. Standing here looking out at the sheer beauty of Scotland, though, I'm bewitched again. Maybe we could pull this off. But if we change Scotland forever by voting yes, we might just be swapping one bunch of predictable politicians for another.
One of the reasons I think that the whole campaign, the whole debate really hasn't caught on in Scotland is because people don't know who our politicians are. You know, the question is often asked, what would happen if Alex Salmond fell underneath a bus tomorrow?
Yeah, well, we contracted Lothian Buses, who issued the following statement. We simply do not have any vehicles in our current fleet which could withstand that kind of impact.
It's true.
But still, I really worry how an independent Scotland is going to stay in the black. First Minister Alex Salmond has no such worry. Maybe it's something to do with future North Sea oil revenues, currently estimated at $2.4 trillion. Mr. Salmond has come to open Nig Yard, a recently revamped oil and gas plant. It's an opportunity to big up the oil industry and sell independence.
In every generation, there's a parcel of rogues at Westminster at the present moment who are manoeuvring to deliver themselves a 10% pay rise when the rest of the public sector is getting 1%. You know, one of the
knocking the British government might be fair game in politics, but wouldn't the workers rather hear what's in it for them?
What about saying to Scots, come along for the ride? We think eventually this is going to be great, but there will be ups and downs along the way, because I think that people feel that this idea of it's going to be great the day right after and immediately for the years to come, I mean, we can't predict that. So what about saying there'll be ups and downs, but come along for the ride?
We've experienced Scottish self-government, so people know that there are some very positive things, there's some things we could do better. But basically, they want that parliament and they want it to grow in power. Our job is to say the powers it needs are the powers over the economy and spending to build that society. We've never claimed that you're going to have free taps in Scotland, you know, whiskey, oil and water. But what we do claim is this is a country with immense human and natural resources, which can be a highly successful country and a much, much fairer society.
You
That
think
is the
Scottish people will be willing to pay for that?
Well,
a more prosperous society?
No, what I say is the best, most successful countries are the most just socially.
A morning spent with the First Minister, and I'm still not convinced. Their economic policies seem a bit half-baked to me.
And for £50 million, you could have 1,200 teachers.
But that's the thing about Scottish nationalism. It's keeping Scotland's ruling party in business. Alex Salmond has been using the promise of a more vibrant, independent country to get elected. Some would say he's enjoying a high-flying political career, preying on the emotions that run under the skin of many a Scot, that we'll do better when we're not shackled to the English.
So, it's with enormous pleasure I declare this wonderful new facility, the beating industrial heart of the Highlands, here at Nig, well and truly open!
Leaving the beating heart of the Highlands behind, what I want to know is this. Why is Scotland asking itself this question now? You guessed it, the politicians. It's back to Edinburgh and the Scottish Parliament on the day that marks exactly 1 year to go until the vote. It feels like a political tug-of-war. The Scottish First Minister wanted to propose something called Devo Max, extra powers for Scotland, but no official break of the Union. The British Prime Minister said no. He wanted Scots to decide once and for all, are you with us or against us? And now it's all about scrambling for votes. One way the nationalists thought they could get more was by lowering the voting age. I'm meeting no campaign leader, Alistair Darling. He's confident that most young Scots are on their side.
16 and 17-year-olds have been pulled over the last 5 years or so. They're now overwhelmingly against independence. And I think one of the reasons for that is that most 16 and 17-year-olds are getting their information not from newspapers or even the television, they're getting it from their iPhones, the internet. And actually they can see there is something far, far bigger, even outside the United Kingdom. What they're looking at is Scotland in the context of things that are going on all over the world. And I think that's why they look at this and say, come on, you know, there's a bigger argument here. And it's striking, actually, how the younger people now, who I think the nationalists, they only gave them the vote because they thought they were theirs to be had, and I think they've been for a rude shock as far as that's concerned.
When the independence vote comes up next year, there's going to be a lot of Braveheart films being shown regularly, and especially with the SNP, they've downed the age in vote from 18 to 16, and a lot of that young people see Braveheart, they're going to go the English, excuse my language, but that's what they're going to say. And that is the scary thing is you're going to have a lot of young people voting who don't know what they're voting for and the consequences it's going to take. And that's a scary factor.
But Scotland's biggest problem is hard to get your head around, whether you're 16 or 64. There's a massive gap between rich and poor, and I'm heading to Glasgow, where it's at its worst. The Scottish government, and before them, successive British governments, couldn't crack it. Scotland has the reputation of being one of the unhealthiest countries in the world.
I tell you what would be a genuine scandal in Scotland is people found out that supermarket own brand beef lasagna contains traces of vegetable.
Furious. Somebody's trying to feed us vitamins
Oh,
here.
go
What's
on.
going on?
There she is, the city of Glasgow, Scotland's economic powerhouse, but with pockets of deprivation so severe that life expectancy is actually better in parts of Iraq and the Gaza Strip. More people here are out of work than in the rest of the UK, and more people die here prematurely of heart disease than anywhere else in the world. Glasgow's problems are Scotland's problems. How do you govern a country well that has such disparity in wealth?
I reckon we're probably the only country in Europe where suicide rates go up in summer.
I think you're probably right, yeah.
As if there was any point committing suicide in Scotland anyway. You know, let's face it, life expectancy is so low, you might as well just wait.
It shocks me every time how poor some of these places are.
Yeah, and if you look at the life expectancy statistics, you can actually track it across the railway lines in Glasgow. Every stop on the railway line that you go to the east takes about 2 or 3 years.
There is a feeling right now, particularly south of the border, that actually Scotland does very well out of England, thank you very much. What do you say to that?
If what you see when you look out of your window is society more or less as you would like it, if you're comfortable with the level of poverty and inequality in our society, you'll probably vote for the status quo. But let's not pass up the opportunity to take that transformational agenda on our own way. Scotland's got the opportunity to be a model of a small, independent, peaceful, democratic society like many others in Northern Europe. And I think that's a far more inspiring future vision for our society than the status quo from Westminster.
When I listen to Patrick, this vision of a standalone Scotland seems not just possible, but preferable. Still, it's money worries that I keep coming back to. A British financial magazine, The Economist, got into trouble when it said an independent Scotland would become Skintland, putting a map on its front cover with the words, "It'll cost you."
And we've actually went down to London to talk to a Scottish resident down there about, you know, what he thinks about the whole independence debate. And here he is.
Oh, yeah. I've been down in London for about 10 years now. But, I mean, you know, I'm as patriotic as the next guy, you know. I mean, you know, Scotland, I mean, I know it's a shithole, eh? But it's my shithole, you know. Independence. To be honest, I didn't really see the point. I mean, the reality of the situation is all the jobs and the opportunity and, I mean, all the money, it's all down here, you know. It's all down south. Big issue. Big issue, sir.
The fact is, Scotland's economy is growing, and not just in cities. To see how Scotland's going to pay for itself means crisscrossing the nation. It's back to the Highlands for a wee dram. Scotch whisky is as much a tradition as an industry, and Stuart from the Royal Lochnagar distillery, which provides whisky for Her Majesty the Queen, who happens to live next door, is proud to show me why.
Wow.
So what we're going to do is we're going to draw a sample of Royal Lochnagar from a cask that was filled in 1986.
Oh, it does smell very grassy. There's a note of something else in there, is it like a sweetness as well? Sort of tickles the inside of your nose.
It's Scotland in a glass, and every whisky is unique, every whisky is different.
It's a huge marketplace, isn't it, really?
They're huge. Our company's whisky, Johnny Walker, has just sold for the first time 20 million 9-litre cases worldwide. And it's the biggest selling whisky in the world by volume. So it's a huge, huge market. Very, very important to Scotland. because we're giving them the most enjoyable of all social lubricants.
Whiskey was part of my childhood. I used to love pouring a glass for my grandpa from his special decanter. I feel so conflicted that this bid for independence is kidnapping my romantic memories of home, to be used as political ammunition by one side or the other to make their argument. And travelling 80 miles to the coast and Peterhead, you realise every Scottish industry has become a pawn in the game.
So, John, this is your boat behind me here, and you've been in the fishing industry. It's a family business, isn't it?
Our family's been in the fishing business for over 60 years now.
Talk to me about independence and how you think that that's going to affect the fishing industry.
I think my personal view on independence, it's going to be a disaster for the fishing industry because the SNP has said that they'll be taking us into Europe. Now, the next UK general election, the Tories already stated that if they win the election, they're going to give us a vote to come out of Europe. I think it'd be better for Scotland to remain in the UK, part of Great Britain, and for the Tories to win that vote, for the public to come out of Europe. It'd be better for the fishing to do the same as Norway, run our own show.
But if I want to get a true picture of the real money coming out of the North Sea, it's oil. And the best way to see it is from the air. Oil is Scotland's black gold, and it's right at the heart of the nationalist optimism.
And independent Scotland's financial future depends on the sea just beyond the coastline there. The campaign for independence is banking on the vast reserves of North Sea oil to keep it in the black.
We're landing just outside of Aberdeen, Scotland's oil boomtown. The European Union buys 60% of its oil from this part of Scotland. This is where I spent my university years. I was taught by Scotland's leading oil expert, who I first met in a lecture hall at Aberdeen University.
It's great to be back. I can't believe it's been 15 years. Shall we take a walk?
Okay.
Fantastic.
It's a short hop to the port, where it's easy to see how important oil is. But I want to find out if it's something an independent Scotland can rely on.
We have the problem that the oil revenues would be volatile and they would be in long-term decline. But, you know, that could be a long way ahead. And the oil industry is actually a leading industry in Scotland.
I find it very confusing. Does that mean that when people are thinking about making a decision on the future of Scotland, that they should not rely on oil as being a reliable part of the economic picture? What's the truth of the matter?
Well, in terms of a government's budget, it would be wise not to be very reliant on oil revenues for normal budget purposes.
Even if oil prices were stable, there's still the question of how much North Sea oil an independent Scotland would control. And even if there's agreement with the rest of the UK, there's another midgie in the ointment, and that's the Shetland Isles. It's a 12.5-hour boat trip to get to Scotland's remotest corner, where I wanted to know how it feels for these communities to be overlooked by mainland politicians.
We're now about 160 kilometres off mainland Scotland, and although they look pretty barren, 22,000 people live here, but they have a very unique and different sense of community and identity here. They look much more to Scandinavia, so eastwards, for a sense of belonging rather than towards Scotland, and that gives them a particularly different perspective when it comes to this question of an independent Scotland.
I think that they feel probably more independent than anything else, I would think. There is still close affinity with the Scandinavian countries. I mean, in our everyday language, Old Norse is spoken here. For instance, the birds, the gannets we call solens, and that's exactly the same in Norway. It's a solen.
But Norwegian or not, it would be dangerous to ignore the islanders. They claim a quarter of Scotland's oil is theirs. When you make it to dry land, it's easy to see why oil is crucial to them. The East Shetland oil basin is one of Europe's largest oil fields, and one of the big questions will be, who owns it? I head to Lerwick, the island's main port and capital, to meet Tavish Scott, who's their Member of Parliament.
So Tavish, does it belong to Scotland or does it belong to the Shetland Isles?
I could probably employ a pretty expensive QC in an Edinburgh court or a London court, and we debate it from now until the referendum actually takes place. That's the point. It's going to be a negotiation. It will depend on the negotiation between a UK government and a separate Scottish government as to where that share takes place and where it ends up. But if you're a Shetlander, your argument is we're part of this, we're part of that debate, and we want an interest in it because our interests as a petro economy are very much about the oil and gas industry, not just now, but over the next 40 years.
And it's very much a topic of conversation here, even if you have to shout over the fiddle frenzy.
So how are you going to vote next year when the referendum happens?
I'm going to vote no.
Why?
Because I don't think Scotland's ready for it.
Been part of the UK for 300 plus years. I don't see any reason to change that.
Tavish and his islanders are determined to make this tiny Scottish outpost count in this massive debate.
I think the strongest argument at the moment is that the islanders want to see some of our own future, some of our own issues determined by people here locally. Alex Salmond makes the argument that the people best served to make decisions about Scotland are the people who live in Scotland. Well, the same argument absolutely applies to Shetland.
So not only will an independent Scotland have to negotiate oil revenues with Shetland, some of her major expenses might go up. One of those will be how Scotland defends itself, and this is a really thorny issue, playing out 650 kilometres west near Glasgow.
Nuclear weapons are illegal. Massive waste of money.
Even when I was growing up, there were frequent protests here. It's hard to imagine somewhere so breathtakingly beautiful could be home to Britain's deadliest weapons.
Britain's national nuclear deterrent is based here at Fastlane Naval Base, just on the Clyde. Now, it's home to several nuclear submarines, all armed with Trident missiles. Although it's here in Scotland, it is vitally important to the defence of Great Britain.
And if the nationalists get their way, this rural corner of Scotland will become nuclear-free.
Yeah, that one, right. We're going to have to pay to get nuclear missiles taken out of the Clyde.
Yeah.
Just keep them.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Keep them.
Yeah, just keep the missiles. We could become like North Korea. They'd pay attention then, wouldn't they?
I'm not entirely sure how safe the rest of the world would feel about Scotland having nuclear weapons. It's a bit like giving a drunk man a bazooka. Do you know?
As with all questions in this debate, there is no simple answer. So I turn to defence expert Dr. Phillips O'Brien.
There's a bit of a myth about independence, that somehow independence gives you authority, gives you power. Actually, what independence gives you is responsibility. And you can't somehow, as an independent country, decide to do whatever you want. No country, the United States can't decide to do whatever it wants to do at any time. Those warheads are strategically vital, not just for Scotland or the RUK. They're important within world politics. They're important within European Union politics. What Scotland will have to do is reach a very, very accommodative relationship with the RUK to get them moved out in time. They can't be rushed.
There are other practicalities as well, Dr. O'Brien, because Scotland plays a massive part, doesn't it, in the military makeup of the whole of the United Kingdom.
Well, what do you see when you look down there? You might see nuclear weapons. You might see Britain's Security Council seat. Other people would see 6,500 jobs in a not wealthy part of Scotland. And that has huge domestic political ramifications. Scotland plays a very major role in what you can call Britain's military-industrial complex. Just down the river from here, if you head down, you'll come across the biggest shipyards in the United Kingdom, the shipyards of Glasgow and Govan on the Clyde, and they build many of the great warships for the United Kingdom. If you head over to the east coast, you have Rosyth, another famous shipyard. So there are a lot of military facilities in Scotland that employ a lot of people, they provide jobs, they have a very famous military heritage, and that an independent Scotland would have to find ways to adjust to a new reality.
Well, the Scottish nationalists are not deterred by the mountain of challenges they have to face. Despite this, polls say most Scots either don't want independence or are still unsure. And yet the world's media can't get enough of the debate. But watching them here, just metres from the Scottish Parliament, I feel it can't come soon enough. There's a growing resentment south of the border, a real feeling that it would be good to see the back of us.
The best way to achieve Scottish independence, from Alex Salmond's point of view, is that if he extended the vote to England, yes, he would almost definitely win, and Hadrian's Wall would be 150 feet high, built from the English side.
Putting back a wall to separate the Scots and English is unthinkable, but still, the rest of the UK is fed up with our wavering. My journey across Scotland has been wonderful, but confusing. I feel that Scotland's heart just isn't in this vision of a standalone Scotland. For me, it's not a question of could Scotland go it alone. Absolutely it could, but should it? Not right now. Devo Max, that's more power for Scotland without absolute divorce, makes most sense to me. And that's something that the British Prime Minister has hinted is on the cards. But that's not the question being asked. So should Scotland be an independent nation? It's academic. Socially, it already is. This is not the Scotland of my birth. It's a country more sure of itself than ever. But ready to be Scotland the brave? If not September, it's a question that will be asked again. Like 300 years of history, it refuses to be swept away.